Hello, welcome to day 317. I am going to share a little bit from the reading in the past week, but before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the meditation techniques. We saw the video with Leo this past weekend, where he gave us 3 options. In effect, the first option was the meditation that we did earlier in the 500 days that was called the do nothing meditation, right? You just allow whatever is happening to happen and you just stay in the observation mode. The second meditation is really new. We haven't practiced it. That meditation is when you notice thoughts during meditation, you let them go. As Michael Langford says, don't even try to complete that thought. Right. So that's a new meditation, which we haven't practiced yet. So some of you may be intrigued by that one and want to practice that. And the third meditation was awareness, watching awareness, which we have been practicing through the open-eyed awareness practice. And we will be practicing more as we move into the latter part of our 500 days. You can practice the awareness, watching awareness method with your eyes closed. Or if you like, you can continue to practice the awareness, watching awareness method with your eyes open, with the open-eyed meditation. Or you might enjoy practicing awareness, watching awareness by starting with your eyes open, getting in touch with awareness, then closing your eyes and maintaining that being in touch with awareness. Sometimes that's the easiest way to do it. But if you haven't yet, you should be really contemplating which meditation technique is best for me now. And you want to select that meditation technique and practice that until you get further instructions through the 500 days. You don't want to be switching around. The instructions will say to practice either the stage 1, 2, or 3 meditation, but that doesn't mean each day you're like, which one should I practice today? You want to pick one and stick with that one. All right, so what I'm going to do now is share from NTI, 2 Corinthians, starting with chapter 7. And I've highlighted just 4 words out of the first paragraph of chapter 7. It says, you are not guilty. I remember when I first started the spiritual path, although I remember that vaguely now, so that's the reason for the pause. But I remember seeing myself as very guilty for little things. Like one thing that really stands out to me, I was moving. I had received the guidance to move to North Carolina, and I was moving from Boston to North Carolina. And as I was cleaning out my Boston house, there was just all this stuff that I wanted to throw away. And, our trash pickup would only pick up what was in the can in 2 bags. I had more than that. So what I did was I drove around town to different apartment complexes or different condo complexes, and I'd throw a bag into the dumpster. I was conscious of the fact that I wasn't supposed to do that because I didn't live there. I was also conscious of the fact that I didn't want to fill up anybody else's dumpster with my bags, which is why I drove all over town, throwing 1 bag in each dumpster. But the guilt that I experienced because there are these signs for residents only, and I don't live there, and I'm throwing in a bag over and over again in different complexes. The guilt that I felt was so strong. You would have thought that I killed somebody. Sometimes when we're on this spiritual path, things that we have repressed begin to come up. Throughout your life, you've hurt people's feelings, you've been rude or mean to someone, you've lied to someone, you've maybe stolen something at some time. We've all done a lot of things, beginning in childhood. And lots of times what we did was we repressed that guilt. We justified our actions. We denied our actions. We blamed someone else. And so lots of times what happens when we begin the spiritual path is all of this repressed guilt from years and years and years of living, at least, if not metaphysical guilt as well from before this lifetime. This guilt starts coming up. And so you may find yourself sometimes feeling abnormally guilty for tiny infractions against your values or your morals or what you think is right. One of the things that we have to learn on this spiritual path is, regardless of what we've done, we're not guilty. It's one of the things we need to accept about ourselves in order to progress. The belief that we are guilty keeps us at a lower vibrational level. It's like it has weights on it, right? It keeps us down. And if we want to ascend to a higher vibrational level within consciousness, we need to accept that regardless of what we've done, we are not guilty. And I know I found this very, very challenging. And some of you may also find this very, very challenging. But it's important to know that letting go of guilt is one of the things that we need to do. Guilt isn't a real thing. Guilt is a belief that comes from judgment. If there was never a judgment that this shouldn't have happened, or I shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done that, there would never be guilt. So judgment is the error. Guilt is the effect, the belief. But neither is real. And what NTI 2 Corinthians is trying to do is to help us to begin to transcend the belief in guilt. And by the way, when we transcend the belief in guilt, we can't just transcend the belief in my guilt or just my guilt in minor instances. We need to transcend the belief in guilt in total, which means we also need to let go of believing that others are guilty. It kind of reminds me of Jesus from the cross when he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." It's helpful to see that everyone is just believing their thoughts and acting on their thoughts, and they don't know any better. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Forgive me, Father. I was simply believing my thoughts. This helps us to transcend guilt, but we need to transcend guilt all the way around. Small circumstances, big circumstances, my guilt, their guilt, right? Guilt as a whole needs to be let go of in order for us to rise in consciousness. So again, NTI 2 Corinthians is trying to help us to begin to transcend the belief in guilt by getting us to refocus our eyes or our attention on the reality of what we are. Because there's no guilt in our reality. Verses 2-7 in chapter 7 say, "I have told you before how loved you are. You have felt this love and known it. The love that I speak of, which you know is God, came to be known to you from within. This love that touched you and moved you with holiness came into your awareness from within you. And this love you knew was real. You felt its comfort and you recognized it. So during moments of devotion, it could be during prayer, it could be during contemplation of NTI or something else. It could be during meditation. But during moments of devotion, we have all known this perfection, this love. And it has no guilt in it. So what this is saying is that perfection, that love did not come to you from something on the outside. Even if you were looking at something on the outside, imagine I'm focusing on, these pictures of St. Francis and contemplating St. Francis, and, this love wells up. The love didn't come from the picture. The love welled up within me. So it wants me, instead of casting my eyes on my thoughts that tell me that I am guilty because I threw trash in a dumpster that I shouldn't have, it wants me to cast my eyes on this perfect love that is within me, that rises up when I'm in contemplation, when I'm in devotion, when I'm in prayer. And then it says, this which you have known is reality. I'm currently reading Liz Cronkite's autobiography. And in her autobiography, from her awakened point of view, she looks back on the life that she lived prior to the awakening. She calls it the life, I forget the exact words, but the gist of it is the life that she thought was hers, right? She looks back on this life that she thought was her life prior to the awakening. And she says what she can see from now is the only part of that that was real was what she calls the Christ. And that's what NTI 2 Corinthians is saying here. The guilt that you think is real isn't real. That's imagination. All judgment is imagination. It's just imagination and the effects of imagination. But this love that you feel when you're in devotion, that's reality. And when you look at that, you don't find any guilt there. So by knowing the difference between imagination, mental imagination, and reality, which we feel in a very strong way when we open ourselves to it, we can feel which one is real and which one is surfacey. And that helps us to transcend the guilt as a part of the surfacey. Because this love that wells up within me is so much more real, so much more home. You in your reality are the answer. You are the truth that you seek. And in welcoming yourself, you welcome your brothers and you welcome all that is true about the world. See, this is what Liz Cronkite is talking about. The only part of that prior life that was real was the Christ. This is what NTI 2 Corinthians is saying. The only part that's real about you, the only part that's real about your brother, the only part that's real about everything is this love, this perfect love, which you've known, you've tasted it, so you know it exists. Excuse me. NTI 2 Corinthians chapter 8 says, if you are willing to lay down your own thinking, you will hear me. We'll hear that wisdom that we recognize as coming from that love. If we think of that love as God, that wisdom is the voice or the intuition of God. We can know that voice or that intuition by laying aside our own thinking. Our thinking is the obstacle. Our thinking is surfacey. What NTI 2 Corinthians goes on to say is that whatever we're focusing our attention on, whatever thought we're believing, we're actually giving to the world. Only since you can't give that which is unreal, the only time you're really giving is when you're giving from your reality. Which means when you're focusing on the thoughts of God, you're in contemplation, you're focusing on your spiritual purpose. During those times, since you're focusing on what's real, you are giving from what's real to the world. It says you'll know when you're giving from reality to the world because you experience what you give. So to the level that you're experiencing devotion, love, joy, happiness, peace, contentment, acceptance, that's to the degree that you're actually giving from reality to the world. The rest of the time, you're just playing around in illusions, doing nothing, just spinning around in imagination. When I ask you to give everything, I ask that you give all thought to the true desire of the heart. This is the only way in which you can give. To not give in this way is not to have given, since that which does not exist cannot be given. You'll notice in our walkabout exercises next week, we're going to spend some time putting our spiritual purpose out front. That means before everything else in our day. So that when we view the day, when we think about the day, we're going to view it or think about it through the filter of our spiritual purpose, our spiritual aspiration. In this way, everything has meaning. If we don't have our spiritual purpose out front, it doesn't have meaning. It's just playing around in illusions. NTI 2 Corinthians chapter 8 says, in being true desire, you are giving. In being that true desire, having like a posture of wanting awakening or wanting truth or wanting to be only love or whatever your spiritual aspiration is. You want to be that to the best of your ability. It's not just something written on a piece of paper somewhere from an exercise we did in the 500 days course. You want to live that, be that. Now, the opposite of being your spiritual aspiration is acting on your belief in the world, seeing the world as reality. And NTI 2 Corinthians chapter 9 says, acting on your belief that the world is real is a mistake because it continues that belief in the mind. Whoever sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly. Whoever shows generously shall also reap generously. And the current interpretation of that is if I'm focused on the world, my experience, my mind, my heart, everything is going to be at the surface, in illusions, caught up in what comes and goes. That's sowing sparingly and reaping sparingly. But if I focus on my spiritual purpose, I stay in the depth of my soul. Then I also experience depth. I experience healing. I experience miracles. Whoever sows generously by staying focused on my spiritual purpose also reaps generously. But as you seem to act in the world based on your belief that you're in the world, the belief and the delusion continue within the mind. As you continue to believe in the world, act on your trust in me. This is waking up from the dream by not participating in the belief in the dream anymore. In other words, even though your voice may be going yada, 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 you got to change this, yada, 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 you got to tell her that, yada, 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 you got to fix this. We're listening to the more silent voice that's giving us whatever guidance is appropriate in the moment. There's a movie I've watched. I may have told you about it before. It's a rather violent movie, but it's a great movie. It's called Revolver by Guy Ritchie. He's the director. And there's this lovely scene in it at the end of the bed, near the end of the movie, where Jake Green's ego is screaming at him, screaming at him, screaming at him, telling him what to do. And he very carefully doesn't listen to it. And he acts from the silence, and he humbles himself. This is saying that if we act on our belief in the world, we're furthering the belief that the world is reality in our mind. If we act from our spiritual intuition, from the voice for God, then we are connecting more to that reality. So pay attention to how we choose to act. Whatever we act from, we further within our own consciousness. It also says the thoughts you think, or we could say that which we give attention to, is heard by one mind, and they affect the fantasy in the mind. In other words, the entire world at some level, at an unconscious level, hears where the attention is, not, it hears it, it feels it, it knows it. And so by keeping our attention with God, we help to raise the vibration of the world. By keeping our attention with the world, we help to keep the world stuck where it is. This is how we become the saviors of the world, by shifting our apparent individual attention. This service that you perform of not believing in the world and of not acting as if the world is real is a service you provide for yourself and for the entirety of the one mind that you are, or for all of consciousness. The question that you always ask is, how are you to live in the world without being a part of it? How do you live in this world without acting on a belief in the world? The world is a thought within the mind of the Son of God, or the world is a thought within consciousness. And all actions within the world are the expression of thought. Therefore, you must look beyond the world and beyond the action to the thought which spawns the image. This is why I ask you to look within and not at the world. So what this is saying is, before you angrily react to something, if you can, take a moment to look. Why are you angry? Is it because you think something should be done differently? Is it just to satisfy your individual will? Can you see how egoic that is? Are you willing to let go of the ego and merge back with your true desire? So pay attention to what's going on, because any action you take is actually just an expression of thought. So it's really not at the level of action that things are corrected. It's at the level of thought. So learn to pay attention to the thoughts that are going on. Learn to question the thoughts that are going on. We've done this a lot. Is this ego or is this right mind? What do I want, ego or right mind? If I want the right mind and this is ego, then let that go. Look within your mind and your heart. Know your purpose. Let your purpose lead in all things. And like I said, that's what we'll be practicing a lot next week. You'll see a lot of walkabout exercises about letting our purpose lead, putting it out front. So I think that's it for today. Of course, you'll have another weekend exercise. Oh, you know what we'll be doing this week? We'll be finishing up NTI 2 Corinthians and beginning NTI Galatians. And from here on out, the books are much smaller, so you'll notice we'll move through them very quickly. Your special assignment this weekend will be a Regina Dawn Akers teaching from NTI Galatians. We're also going to spend a lot of time looking at judgment, because judgment is a big part of what NTI Galatians is teaching us about. So enjoy the week. Focus on keeping your purpose out front as you'll be instructed through the walkabout exercises. Read NTI contemplatively every day. And I'll see you next week. Bye.